You can always tell who someone really is by how they treat people they think don't matter. Ethan Caldwell said with a faint smirk as he adjusted his sunglasses, standing at the edge of the private infinity pool overlooking the bright blue stretch of Miami Beach. His voice low but sharp enough to carry across the polished marble deck where guests lounged under white umbrellas and waitstaff moved quietly between them. And in that moment, every eye slowly drifted toward the young woman standing a few feet away from him. Her uniform simple, her posture straight despite the tension in the air, a folded towel in her hands as if it were the only thing anchoring her in place. Because Ethan Caldwell wasn't just any guest, he was the owner of the entire resort, a billionaire known for building empires out of nothing and expecting perfection from everyone around him. And right now his attention was locked onto Lily Harper, the pool attendant who had made the smallest mistake, or at least what he believed was a mistake, placing the wrong reserved sign on a lounge chair that belonged to one of his high-profile clients. Something most people would brush off with a quick correction, but Ethan didn't brush things off. He made examples out of them, and the silence that followed his words felt heavier than the humid Florida air as Lily lifted her eyes to meet his for just a second before lowering them again. Not in submission, but in control, as if she were choosing her response carefully. While guests nearby exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others curious, because moments like this were rare but unforgettable, the kind that revealed more than anyone intended. And Ethan took a step closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tile, his tone colder now as he continued. If you can't handle something this basic, maybe you're in the wrong place. And there it was, the line that turned a small correction into something personal, something cutting, yet Lily didn't flinch the way most people would. She didn't rush to apologize or stumble over excuses. Instead, she simply adjusted her grip on the towel and spoke in a calm, even voice that didn't match the situation at all. "I understand, sir," she said, her words measured, steady, but then she added something that made Ethan pause for the briefest moment, something quiet but unmistakably firm. "But sometimes things aren't what they seem." And for a second, just a second, there was a flicker of something unreadable in her expression, like she knew something no one else did, like she was seeing a bigger picture that hadn't revealed itself yet. And Ethan almost laughed it off, almost dismissed it as nothing more than a defensive remark. But instead he shook his head slightly and gestured toward the exit of the pool area. "Just fix it," he said, already turning away as if the conversation was beneath him, as if she was beneath him. And Lily nodded once, stepping back, her movements precise and controlled. But as she walked away, there was no rush in her pace, no sign of embarrassment. Only a quiet determination that didn't fit the role he had just forced onto her. And as the sound of the ocean blended with the soft chatter of guests returning to their conversations, Ethan settled back into his chair, convinced the moment was over, convinced he had handled it exactly the way he always did, efficiently, decisively, without hesitation, not realizing that in less than 15 minutes, everything he thought he understood about that girl, about that moment, and even about himself, was about to be completely overturned in a way he never saw coming. The sun climbed higher over the ocean, casting sharp reflections across the still surface of the infinity pool as if nothing unusual had happened. And for most people on the deck, the moment had already faded into background noise. Just another brief display of power from a man who controlled everything around him. But for Lily Harper, the moment did not disappear. It settled quietly beneath the surface, stored away without reaction, without visible emotion, as she moved toward the service station at the far end of the pool, placing the folded towels down with careful precision, her hands steady, her breathing even, while a coworker nearby leaned in slightly and whispered, asking if she was okay, her tone filled with concern that felt louder than the earlier confrontation. And Lily simply gave a small nod, not dismissing the concern but not feeding it either, as if she had learned long ago that reacting only gave situations more power than they deserved. And instead she focused on her work, adjusting chairs, aligning umbrellas, maintaining the quiet order expected in a place where everything was designed to look effortless, even though nothing truly was. While across the deck, Ethan Caldwell had already shifted his attention back to a call, his voice calm, controlled, discussing numbers that moved faster than most people could comprehend. his world returning to its usual rhythm of decisions and expectations. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, there was a faint echo of her voice, that one sentence that did not fit the role he had assigned her, but he pushed it aside, because distractions were not something he allowed to linger, especially not from someone he considered insignificant, and time moved forward, measured in the slow ticking of luxury watches and the quiet clinking of glasses, until the stillness broke in a way no one had planned, when a guest near the deeper end of the pool suddenly called out for help, not loudly at first, but with enough urgency to ripple through the calm atmosphere, causing nearby conversations to pause and heads to turn, and within seconds the tone of the entire space shifted, tension replacing ease as staff members began moving quickly, unsure of exactly what was happening, but knowing something was wrong. While Ethan stood up instinctively, his gaze narrowing as he tried to assess the situation from a distance, his mind already calculating the potential impact on his reputation, his guests, his business, as more voices joined in, confusion spreading faster than clarity, and in the middle of that uncertainty, one person moved with complete focus, cutting through the noise without hesitation. Lily stepping forward with a calm authority that did not match her position, her pace quick but controlled as she reached the guest, lowering herself beside them with a level of confidence that made those closest to her step back without being asked, her voice clear and steady. As she began giving instructions, not loudly but with a precision that carried, guiding the surrounding staff with simple, direct commands that replaced panic with action, and for the first time since the incident earlier, Ethan found himself watching her again, but this time not with dismissal, not with judgment, but with a growing sense that something about her did not align with the image he had so quickly decided on, because the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she took control of a situation that others hesitated to approach. It was not accidental, it was not luck, it was something practiced, something earned, and as the seconds stretched and the tension held tight across the pool deck, Ethan took a slow step forward, his attention fully captured now, no longer divided by calls or conversations, as a quiet realization began to form, not fully understood yet, but impossible to ignore, that the girl he had just dismissed as replaceable might be the one person in that moment who was anything but ordinary. The air around the pool felt tighter now, like every second stretched longer than it should, as Lily remained focused beside the guest, her movements calm and deliberate while others hovered nearby, unsure whether to step in or step back, and her voice continued guiding the situation with a quiet authority that did not need to be loud to be heard, asking for space, requesting specific items, directing one staff member to call for medical support, while another was told to bring water and shade. Her tone never rising, never wavering, as if she had stepped into a role she knew by instinct rather than by chance. And Ethan stood only a few feet away now, no longer watching from a distance, his attention fully fixed on her in a way that felt unfamiliar, because this was not the same person he had dismissed minutes earlier, not the same girl holding a towel and avoiding eye contact. This was someone composed under pressure, someone who understood exactly what to do when others did not, and that difference unsettled him more than he expected, because it suggested something he did not like to admit, that his first judgment might have been wrong, and Ethan did not make wrong judgments. At least that was what he had always believed. But as he watched Lily carefully check the guest, speaking calmly to reassure them while maintaining control of the situation, that belief began to shift, slowly but undeniably, as small details started to stand out. The way she observed before acting, the precision in her instructions, the confidence that came from experience rather than guesswork, and the surrounding guests who had once been lounging in relaxed silence were now watching with a different kind of attention, curiosity mixed with respect, their earlier discomfort replaced by a growing recognition that something important was happening right in front of them. And when the distant sound of approaching paramedics finally reached the pool deck, a subtle wave of relief moved through the crowd. But Lily did not step back immediately. She stayed exactly where she was, continuing to monitor the situation until the professionals arrived, giving them a clear and concise update without hesitation, her words efficient, her tone steady, as if she had done this countless times before, and one of the paramedics gave her a quick nod of acknowledgement, a small but meaningful gesture that did not go unnoticed by Ethan, because it was not the kind of respect given lightly. And as they took over, Lily finally stood up, brushing her hands lightly against her uniform. Her expression unchanged, not seeking attention, not waiting for praise, simply stepping aside as if returning to the role everyone had assumed she belonged in. But the illusion had already been broken, and Ethan could feel it, the shift in perception that could not be undone, because now every detail about her seemed different, every movement more intentional, every silence more meaningful. And as Lily turned slightly, her gaze passing over him for just a brief moment, there was no resentment in her eyes, no visible anger, just a calm distance that felt far more powerful than any reaction he might have expected, and it left him with a strange sense of unease, because for the first time that day, he was no longer certain he was the one in control of the narrative unfolding around him. And as the paramedics escorted the guest away and the pool area slowly began to return to its polished calm, Ethan remained where he stood, watching Lily walk back toward the service area with the same steady pace as before. But now every step carried a question he could not ignore. Who exactly was she? And how had he managed to completely misread someone standing right in front of him? The calm slowly returned to the pool deck. But for Ethan, something had shifted in a way he could not ignore, as if the polished surface of his perfectly controlled world had developed a small crack that kept pulling his attention back to it no matter how much he tried to look away. And while guests resumed their conversations and staff returned to their routines, his focus remained fixed on one thing: Lily Harper, now moving quietly near the service station again, folding towels with the same precision as before, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. And that was exactly what unsettled him the most, because people who stepped into chaos and handled it with that level of calm did not simply go back to being invisible, not unless they were used to being underestimated. And that thought lingered as Ethan finally broke his stillness and began walking toward the resort manager who had just arrived, clearly concerned about what had happened, speaking quickly about guest satisfaction, liability, and response time. But Ethan barely listened to the details, his mind already moving in a different direction as he interrupted with a simple question, asking who the pool attendant was, the one who handled the situation before the paramedics arrived. And the manager hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering, clearly surprised by the question, explaining that her name was Lily Harper, that she had been working there for a few weeks, that she kept to herself and did her job without complaints. Nothing out of the ordinary on paper, nothing that explained what Ethan had just witnessed, and that lack of explanation only deepened his curiosity, because he had built his entire career on reading people quickly and accurately, on understanding value at a glance, and yet, in this case, he had completely missed it, and that was not something he accepted easily. So without another word, he dismissed the manager and continued walking, his direction now clear, his pace steady but deliberate as he crossed the pool deck once more, ignoring the subtle glances from guests who recognized him, because for the first time that day, his priority was not business, not reputation, but a single unanswered question. And as he approached the service area, he slowed slightly, observing before speaking, watching the way Lily moved, the quiet efficiency in her actions, the absence of any need for recognition. And when she finally noticed his presence, she did not react with surprise or tension. She simply met his gaze for a brief moment, and then returned to her task, as if his presence did not carry the weight it usually did, and that alone caught him off guard more than anything else had so far, because he was used to people adjusting around him, reacting to him. But she did not, and that difference forced him to reconsider his approach, even if only slightly, as he spoke her name for the first time, not sharply, not dismissively, but with a measured tone that suggested something closer to curiosity than authority. And when she looked up again, her expression remained calm, unreadable, waiting without expectation, and Ethan paused for a second, something rare for him, as if choosing his next words more carefully than usual, because the dynamic had changed, whether he wanted to admit it or not. And when he finally spoke, his question was simple but direct, asking how she knew what to do back there, asking where she had learned to handle a situation like that. And for a brief moment, there was silence between them, not uncomfortable, but filled with something unspoken, as if the answer carried more weight than the question itself. And Lily held his gaze just long enough to make it clear that she understood exactly what he was asking, and exactly why he was asking it, before she responded in the same calm tone she had used all along, saying that sometimes experience comes from places people do not expect. And that was all she offered. No explanation. No details. Just enough to confirm what he already suspected, that there was more to her than he had seen. And as she returned to her work once again, leaving the conversation unfinished, Ethan remained standing there for a moment longer, realizing that for the first time in a very long time, he was the one being kept in the dark, and that realization did not sit comfortably with him at all. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with the same polished rhythm the resort was known for, but Ethan could no longer experience it the way he usually did, because something subtle yet persistent had taken hold of his attention, like a question that refused to be ignored no matter how many distractions he placed in front of it. And even as he returned to his usual routine of calls and brief meetings, his thoughts kept circling back to the same moment, the same voice, the same calm confidence. That did not belong to someone in Lily Harper's position, and it was not just curiosity anymore. It was something closer to discomfort, because if there was one thing Ethan valued above all else, it was control, and control came from understanding, from knowing exactly who people were and what they were capable of. But Lily did not fit into any category he had assigned her, and that lack of clarity unsettled him in a way he could not easily dismiss. So as the sun began to lower slightly over the horizon, casting longer shadows across the pool deck, he made a decision that he would not normally need to think twice about. He went looking for answers, not through conversation this time, but through information, because information was where he was strongest, and within minutes, he was inside his private office overlooking the resort, a space designed for focus and precision, where every detail was intentional. And as he sat behind the sleek glass desk, he reached for his tablet and pulled up the employee records, navigating quickly through profiles until he found her name, Lily Harper. And at first glance, everything appeared ordinary. Recent hire, minimal listed experience, basic references, nothing that stood out, nothing that explained what he had seen earlier. But Ethan did not stop at first glance. He never did. He began digging deeper, cross-checking details, scanning for inconsistencies, patterns, anything that did not align. And it did not take long before small discrepancies began to appear, subtle enough that most people would overlook them, but clear enough to someone trained to notice. Gaps in the timeline, vague descriptions where there should have been specifics, references that led nowhere substantial. And the more he looked, the clearer it became that the file in front of him was incomplete, not accidentally, but intentionally. And that realization shifted something inside him, because people do not hide their past without a reason, especially not people who possess the kind of skill and composure he had witnessed. And as he leaned back slightly in his chair, his mind began connecting possibilities, none of them simple, none of them comfortable, and for a brief moment, he considered letting it go, convincing himself that it did not matter, that she was just one employee among many. But that thought did not hold, because this was no longer about her position. It was about the fact that he had been wrong, and Ethan Caldwell did not accept being wrong without understanding why. And as he sat there in the quiet of his office, the distant sound of the ocean barely reaching through the glass, he made a decision that would push things further than they had gone so far. He would confront her again, but this time not as a superior correcting an employee, and not even as a curious observer, but as someone determined to uncover the truth. And as he stood up and adjusted his jacket, his expression settling into a more controlled, deliberate calm, there was a new intention behind his actions, something more focused, more personal, because whatever Lily Harper was hiding, he was no longer willing to remain in the dark about it. And somewhere deep down, beneath the layers of logic and control, there was another realization beginning to form, one he had not yet fully acknowledged, that this was not just about solving a mystery. It was about the undeniable sense that the story he thought he was in control of had already started to move beyond him. And he was only just beginning to catch up. By the time Ethan stepped out of his office, the golden hour had begun to settle over the resort, casting a warm glow across the property that softened every edge except the tension building in his mind. And as he made his way back toward the pool area, his pace was steady but more deliberate than before, no longer driven by impulse, but by a calculated need for clarity. Because the more he had looked into Lily Harper's background, the less it made sense. and that lack of clarity was not something he could tolerate, not in his world where everything had a reason, a pattern, a traceable path. And as he approached the service corridor just behind the pool deck, the noise of guests faded slightly, replaced by the quieter rhythm of staff moving between tasks. And it did not take long for him to spot her again, standing near a storage cabinet, organizing supplies with the same precise movements he had come to recognize, as if every action she took was intentional, measured, and when he stepped closer this time, she noticed him immediately, her posture straightening just slightly, not out of nervousness but awareness, as if she had already anticipated that this conversation was not over. And for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, the silence carrying a different weight now, no longer defined by hierarchy, but by something more balanced, something more uncertain. And Ethan broke it first, his tone calm but direct, asking her why her file did not match what he had seen earlier, why someone with her level of composure and knowledge would be working as a pool attendant with no clear explanation of her past. And his words were not accusatory, but they were sharp, precise, cutting straight to the point, because that was how he operated. And Lily listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, her gaze steady, as if she had expected this question from the moment he first approached her. And when she finally responded, her voice was just as calm as before. But there was something different beneath it now, something more grounded, more intentional, as she said that not everything valuable needs to be visible to be real, and that sometimes people choose where they stand, not because they have to, but because they want to. And Ethan studied her closely as she spoke, searching for hesitation, for inconsistency, for anything that would give him leverage. But there was none, only a quiet certainty that made it difficult to challenge her without sounding unreasonable. And that alone shifted the dynamic further than he was prepared for, because he was used to leading conversations, to controlling the direction and outcome. But with her, every response felt like it redirected him instead, and for the first time in a long time, he found himself without an immediate answer, without a clear path forward, and that unfamiliar position forced him to adjust, even if only slightly. As he changed his approach, his tone softening just enough to reveal a different intention, asking not as a superior now, but as someone genuinely trying to understand what she was really doing there, what brought her to a place like this. And for a moment, it seemed like she might not answer, her gaze drifting slightly past him toward the fading light over the ocean, as if weighing how much to reveal. And then she spoke again, quietly, saying that sometimes stepping away from who you were is the only way to figure out who you are supposed to be. And that answer, simple as it sounded, carried a depth that Ethan could not immediately unpack, because it was not the kind of response he dealt with in contracts or negotiations. It was something more personal, something less defined. And as she turned back to her work once again, leaving the conversation open-ended, Ethan remained there for a moment longer, realizing that whatever truth he was looking for, it was not going to come easily, and more importantly, it was not something he could force. And that realization marked a shift he had not expected when this day began, because for the first time, the answer he wanted was not something he could simply take, it was something he would have to earn. The evening settled over the resort with a calm that felt almost deceptive, as if the quiet atmosphere was trying to smooth over everything that had happened earlier. But for Ethan, there was no sense of closure, only a growing awareness that something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface. Something he could not fully control or predict. And as the lights around the pool flickered on, casting a soft glow across the water, he found himself standing alone near the edge, watching the reflections shift with each subtle movement, his mind replaying every word Lily had said, every detail that did not align with the version of reality he was used to managing, because her answers had not given him clarity. They had only made him realize how limited his understanding had been. And that realization was not something he could ignore, not when it challenged the very foundation of how he saw the world. And as he remained there, lost in thought, he began to notice something else, something he had overlooked before, the way the staff interacted with her, subtle but consistent. A quiet respect that was not based on position or authority, but something else entirely, something earned, and it made him question how many moments he had missed simply because he had not been looking for them. And that thought stayed with him as he turned away from the pool and walked toward the staff exit, a place he rarely visited, not out of avoidance, but because he had never needed to. Yet now it felt like the only direction that made sense. And when he reached the back corridor, the environment shifted again, less polished, more real, the kind of space where roles were less performative and more honest. And it was there that he saw her once more, sitting alone on a bench, taking a brief moment to herself, her posture relaxed in a way he had not seen before, as if the weight of constant observation had finally lifted, and for a moment, he hesitated, something he was not used to doing, because this was no longer about authority or curiosity. It was something more personal now, something that required a different kind of approach, and when he finally stepped closer, she looked up, her expression calm but not distant this time, as if she recognized that the dynamic between them had already changed, and Ethan took a breath before speaking, not out of uncertainty but out of intention, choosing his words with a level of care that would have seemed unnecessary to him just hours earlier, as he acknowledged what had happened at the pool, not directly apologizing yet, but not dismissing it either, and Lily listened without interruption, her gaze steady, giving him the space to continue without guiding him. And that alone made him realize how different this interaction was from any he had experienced before, because there was no pressure, no expectation, just a quiet presence that made honesty feel unavoidable. And when he finally paused, the silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was reflective, as if both of them understood that something important had shifted, and Lily spoke again, her voice softer now, but no less steady, saying that people reveal who they are in moments they do not plan for, not in the roles they perform when everything is controlled. And those words landed with more weight than anything she had said before, because they were not just a statement. They were a mirror, reflecting something back at him that he had not been ready to see. And for the first time, Ethan did not try to respond immediately. He did not try to redirect or redefine the conversation. He simply stood there, absorbing the meaning behind her words. And in that moment, the certainty he had carried all day began to shift into something else, something quieter but far more significant. The realization that the story he thought he understood was not about control or status. It was about perspective, and his had been incomplete from the very beginning. The quiet between them lingered longer than either of them expected, but this time it did not feel uncertain. It felt necessary, as if both were standing at a point where something unspoken needed to be acknowledged before anything could move forward. And Ethan, who had built his entire life on decisive action, found himself doing something unfamiliar again. He chose not to rush it. He allowed the moment to exist without forcing it into a conclusion. And as the distant sound of waves rolled in from the shore beyond the resort, he finally spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of the sharp edge it carried earlier in the day, as he admitted something he rarely allowed himself to say out loud, that he had misjudged her, not as a formality, not as a strategic apology, but as a simple truth. And the words felt different leaving his mouth, less controlled, more real, and Lily watched him carefully, not with surprise, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet understanding, as if she had been waiting not for the apology itself, but for the sincerity behind it, and she nodded slightly, acknowledging his words without immediately accepting or rejecting them, because for her, this was not about a single moment. It was about a pattern, about how people chose to see others when they believed there were no consequences, and Ethan seemed to understand that without her needing to explain it, because he did not try to justify his earlier behavior. He did not shift blame or soften the reality of what had happened. He simply stood there, allowing the weight of it to exist between them. And that alone marked a change that neither of them could ignore. And after a brief pause, Lily spoke again, her tone calm, but more open than before, as she said that respect is not something that can be offered only after someone proves their worth. It has to be there from the beginning. Otherwise, it is not respect at all. And those words settled into the space between them with a clarity that was impossible to dismiss, because they addressed something deeper than the situation itself, something that reached into the way Ethan had always approached the world, measuring value, assigning importance, making decisions based on visible outcomes. And for the first time, he could see the flaw in that system, not as a concept, but as a lived moment that had just unfolded in front of him. And as he took that in, his posture shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough to reflect the internal change that was happening. And he asked her something then, not out of control or curiosity, but out of genuine interest. what she wanted, not from him, not from the resort, but from her own path, because everything she had said suggested that she was there by choice, not by circumstance. And Lily considered the question for a moment, her gaze steady as she answered that sometimes the most important thing is not where you end up, but who you become along the way. And that right now, she was exactly where she needed to be. And that answer, simple as it sounded, carried a sense of purpose that Ethan recognized immediately, because it was the same kind of clarity he had once had at the beginning of his own journey, before everything became structured and controlled. And as that realization settled in, the distance between them felt different, not gone, but changed, less defined by hierarchy and more by mutual awareness. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing left to say, but because what had already been said was enough to shift everything. And as Lily stood up from the bench, preparing to return to her work, she paused briefly, looking at him with a calm certainty that had been there from the start, and said that people can change, but only if they are willing to see beyond what they expect. And then she walked past him, leaving him there once again, but this time not with questions, but with something far more challenging, the understanding that change was now his responsibility, and that what he chose to do next would define everything that followed. The night settled fully over the resort, wrapping the ocean in a deep blue calm that stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. And for the first time that day, Ethan did not return to his office, did not reach for his phone, did not try to regain control through professional routines. Instead, he remained where he was, standing in the quiet space between who he had been that morning and who he might become after everything that had unfolded. And Lily's words stayed with him, not as echoes, but as something more permanent, something that reshaped the way he saw every interaction, every decision, every assumption he had made without question. And as he slowly walked back toward the main pool area, now nearly empty, the reflections of the lights dancing across the water felt different, as if the place itself had not changed, but his perspective had, and that shift was undeniable. Because for the first time, he was not looking at the resort as something he owned, but as something he was responsible for in a way that went beyond business, beyond reputation, into something more human. And when he spotted Lily again in the distance, finishing her shift, placing the last of the folded towels into their proper place, he did not approach her immediately, not out of hesitation, but out of understanding, because not every moment needed to be claimed, some needed to be respected. And instead he observed quietly, noticing the details he had overlooked before, the consistency in her actions, the quiet strength in her presence, the way she carried herself without needing recognition. And when she finally turned to leave, their eyes met once more, and this time there was no tension, no imbalance, just a shared awareness of everything that had changed. And Ethan gave a small nod, not as a gesture of authority, but as acknowledgement, something simple but genuine, and Lily returned it just as quietly before continuing on her way, disappearing into the softly lit corridor beyond the pool deck, leaving him alone again, but not in the same way as before, because now the silence felt different. It felt like a beginning rather than an end. And as he stood there, looking out over the water, he understood something that would stay with him long after this